Sanctions have been imposed on 82 individuals and 29 companies. German payment provider Wirecard went bankrupt on Tuesday.
Russia has launched an unprecedented disinformation campaign against...
Billions of dollars have been found in various offshore accounts.
Welcome to Integrity Insights, the Berlin Risk Podcast. Hello, dear fans of our beloved Berlin Risk Podcast. I spoke today to Daniel Shkedi, who is the head of product marketing and strategy at Refine Intelligence, a US and Israel-based AML software provider. Daniel is also a fraud and threat intelligence researcher specializing in cybercriminal activity on the dark web and Telegram. I invited Daniel to discuss his research into money laundering as a service, a booming field of criminal groups offering various money laundering services online. As Daniel says on the podcast, money laundering as a service is the evil twin of AML, so all people working in this field should have at least some level of understanding. So I bring you Daniel Shkedi. All right, Daniel, welcome on the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Okay, let's kick off with a brief intro. Can you tell our listeners about your sort of professional background?
Of course. So my name is Daniel Shkedi. I am the head of product marketing and strategy at Refine Intelligence. And Refine Intelligence is a startup building a fraud prevention platform, mostly focusing on U.S. financial institutions. And again, the primary focus is mostly on check fraud and scam prevention. So I've been in the fraud prevention, AML, and cybersecurity spaces for over 10 years now. Before joining Refine, I held a variety of product marketing and pre-sales roles at leading fraud prevention companies, tech companies, including BioCatch, Forder, and Identic. And so over the years, I specialized in a wide range of fraud types, right? I've seen, obviously a lot in the banking world. So it could be fraud attacks like account takeovers and new account fraud, as well as e-commerce fraud like card not present, CNP fraud, automated attacks, retail policy abuse, and more. And in addition to my work in product and strategy, I am also a fraud and threat intelligence researcher focused on cybercriminal activity on the dark web and Telegram. And I've published extensively on these topics and covering, a lot of subtopics like online fraud prevention and banking, e-commerce, payments, identity validation, emerging underground threats, and AI-driven fraud and e-crime. So that's really in a nutshell.
And regarding these research projects, I recently came across your research project looking into money laundering as a service. Can you maybe talk us through how this project came about and what are maybe some of the main findings
of
your
course
research?
Yeah, so this project was started sometime in April 2024. My good friend and former colleague Rio Miner and we started working on this. The idea was to create a research program that, with the goal to systematically map and analyze the evolving ecosystem of professional money laundering services offered to fraudsters, and particularly, on Telegram and the dark web. And since the beginning of this project, we've uncovered, structured service economies, including cash out networks, money-mule recruitment, networks, and laundering packages, so to speak, right? That it kind of mirrors, in a sense, legitimate financial services in terms of the sophistication and scale, right? Just in the dark web. So that is kind of the background, how we started the money laundering as a service, or I like to call it MLAS. So that's a term that we coined together, and I use it interchangeably. So I'll tell you a little about the project itself, right? So we actually used a pretty solid methodology, right? And the idea was to collect data using a variety of collection tools. Could be what we call OSINT, open source intelligence, human intelligence, and cyber intelligence, and use a multi-layered approach to collect data from the dark web, basically, and create a sample, create a database. So in phase one of the project, we roughly collected 350 MLS ads, basically ads in the dark web, in dark web forums and dark web marketplaces of financial criminals that were offering these money laundering services, okay? And we sampled them systematically, and I'd say 99% of them were ads that were posted just within the last 12 months when we started the project, okay? And after we sampled them and we created the database, and of course we did a lot of statistical analysis and checks just to make sure that, you know, the results are significant, we came up with a definition of 8 typologies or basic money laundering services, and that's how we classified the ads, and then we divided them. So I can before I say something about that, I can tell you a little about the typologies if you're interested in that.
Yes, please, absolutely.
Okay, so after looking at the data, like I said, we identified 8 typologies. And I'll just give a kind of a very short definition for each one of them, right? So the first one is bank drops, right? Essentially, we're talking about ads. The main service over there was accounts that are rented for a commission or they're actually sold. And they're usually used to facilitate a cash out, right? There's a wire transfer or some other payment, and then they actually withdraw the funds from those drops. The second typology is what we call bank loaders, and essentially layering accounts. These are the folks who actually make the payments to the bank drops, right? And they move funds onward, often to bank drop accounts. Then we have the end-to-end money laundering services, and essentially we are talking about businesses, okay? These are large organizations, criminal enterprises that provide comprehensive financial services for all 3 money laundering phases, right? The layering and all of that. It's really, really interesting because it seems like it's very organized. It seems like organized crime. Then we can talk about a few more. The shell companies, you know, services such as setting up shell companies, the documentation, etc., like that. Bank insiders, very, very interesting phenomena. We're basically seeing bank employees offering insider services at financial institutions, right? Selling stolen checks, selling stolen data. It's fascinating. And a few minor stuff such as fake statements, you know, folks who forge bank statements or utility bills or other documentation. Trade goods, that is kind of using bulk goods like gold or diamonds or stuff like that for money laundering. And cash outs, very kind of street level cash outs. That's what we call it. Folks who, who actually go to the ATM and they withdraw money from an account and then they move on. So those were the typologies.
Can we maybe, Daniel, drill down into, I'm interested in the as you say, the most prevalent typology, the bank drops. Like, do you see, you know, these bank accounts offered across, you know, different jurisdictions in Europe, in the US, or is it, you know, all over the world, or is it you know, maybe specific to like one jurisdiction or one part of the world?
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually looked at this from a geographic standpoint as well, and I can say that the vast majority of the services were for North American banks, typically the U.S. and Canada, but it was a global phenomenon. It was all, you know, in all parts of the world, in all regions of the world. in EMEA, the UK and Germany and Poland, Spain, the Netherlands, France. I mean, a very long list. It was in Latin America. It was in Asia and the Pacific, and in countries like India, China, Australia. All of them similar, but they had some nuances and some different flavors, so to speak, of this type of the services, and pricing was different, but it was a global phenomenon.
Mm. But if I understand it correctly, Daniel, it basically the way it works is that, let's say, like you have a cyber criminal who obtained money via cybercrime. Now they want to cash it out, so they will purchase on the dark web a particular like fake or I don't know stolen account, and they just need to find a way to send money to this account, and then they can withdraw using the credit card. They can withdraw money from an ATM of this account.
Yeah, exactly. So the accounts they may be obtained in legitimate ways. They could be real accounts that were aged, but it's usually obtained through illegal activities, such as account takeovers or the use of synthetic IDs or identity theft or mule accounts, and that's basically how they take control of these accounts, right? And once they control the accounts, they can use them, like I said, they can use them as a service. You can rent them out. You can say, hey, if you want to launder, I'd say the most common model that I see is like a split model. What does that mean? It means, hey, I have like $1,000 that I want to launder. I'm going to split the $1,000 60-40. Okay. So if you make the payment, if you load the account, then you're going to get 40% of that, and I'll keep 60%.
So the price is really, really high. You pay more than half for this type of service.
Well, pricing changes, and there are but it's a very, very common model to see, partnerships. Hey, I'm looking for a partner. I'll split it 50-50. I'll split it 70-30 or anyways. But essentially you really need two kind of folks in this process. You need the folks who make the payment, or the layering, right? It could the loaders, and you need the bank drops, someone who controls the account, and you're able to monetize the account after the payment, or monetize the payment.
So if you are let's stick to this example of a cyber criminal, you would need to find both a bank drop service and a bank loader service. Like you can do one without the other.
Well, you're typically going to need both ends, right, of kind of the payment process. But again, typically it depends on the specialization, right? Where we see a lot of folks who have bank drops who are looking for loaders, and vice versa. Those are the criminals, and they're like, hey, we have money, or we have a job that we need to launder a certain amount of money, and we need someone who can actually, who has a bank drop and who can monetize that later, and then they can deliver the money to another account, or there are different ways of doing this, right? But essentially you need someone to make the payment, and you need an account, a bank drop for the monetization process.
This kind of, like, now listening to Daniel, it kind of sounds like this might even, some of these people operating these bank drops, they might even, correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe they are even operating as subcontractors for like some larger money laundering groups, whereby they only specialize on this particular kind of like part of the chain. Is it
absolutely
possible?
I think that's spot on, and that goes to the other typology that I presented, and that's the end-to-end money laundering services, right? So like I said, these are criminal enterprises, right? It's a business. It's very, very important to understand that these are not petty thieves, but it's a business. And in many cases, it's a very sophisticated and intricate business and organization. And those end-to-end money laundering services, they support, placement, layering, and integration, all stages of money laundering. They use a variety of instruments, right? Their level of sophistication and expertise is immense, right? Just for instance, I'm looking at an ad right now, and I mean, just the types of laundering services over here through commodities is unreal. For instance, laundering money through goods, through commodities like fuel and petroleum transactions or other commodities, currency transactions, gold transactions, bank guarantees. It could be capital market transactions, private equity, real estate, jet fuel, crude oil, petroleum, gas, agricultural goods, and the list goes on and on. But I think that really kind of conveys the sense of that how sophisticated these organizations are.
I mean, this is really crazy. I mean, especially I find really fascinating the real estate example. Like, do you have any idea of how this works? Is it does this basically mean that they are able to buy a real estate on your behalf somehow with laundered funds?
Yeah. So my guess is, because again, I'm looking at the ads and I'm looking, but so I don't have intel into exactly how they're doing it in some of these transactions, but I would assume that they have insiders at real estate companies who are working with them, basically, and they're part of the laundering network, and they can start layering and moving money from A to B, from B to C, and C to this real estate company. They make some sort of transaction. It could be an investment or it could be something else, and boom, voila, they they laundered all the money. So that's, again, just based on very simplistic logic, but I think that's kind of how it happens. They have insiders at global corporations sometimes and other services, and they work together.
And I mean, do you have? I mean, I mentioned this as an example, this example of a cyber criminal who wants to launder funds. Do you? I mean, I understand that you only see the ads, you don't really see their clients, but do you maybe have from your experience some ideas of who are the most people most likely to use these kind of services?
So again, I think we're typically talking about, I would say, usually small scale money launderers, right? Folks who probably are involved also in fraud at some level. It could be stealing funds, right? So, but they need to monetize it somehow, and they start laundering it through a network. So they start moving it from A to B and B to C and other places, right? So I would say that on the dark web and places like that, we're mostly seeing, I don't want to say street level fraud in AML, because it's probably not that. We're probably looking at thousands of dollars per cyber criminal or financial criminal. But with that being said, at the very top of the pyramid, we're also seeing large scale enterprise-like transactions that are being conducted through these services. And I touched upon that earlier, right, when I was talking about that. That is the type of people who use these services. A word about who are the people providing the services, right? So typically when I talk about this, I show a pyramid, and you have 3 tiers in the pyramid. You have the newbies at the very bottom, who are the vast majority of the cyber criminals out there, right? Folks who are trying to get into cybercrime and financial crime, and they make up, like I said, the vast majority of the fraudsters out there. They're probably like a guesstimate, right? A rough estimate would be 70%. And then in the middle, you have the specialists. And these folks are folks who have, really solid technical skills and they're more sophisticated. They have more knowledge, but they don't create tools for other cyber criminals. They offer their services, and at the very, very, very top of the pyramid, I'd say is no more than 5%. Those are the experts, and the experts, those are folks who not only provide white glove premium fraud and AML services, but they also create automated tools, forged documents, fake shell companies, all sorts of stuff to support other low scale cyber or financial criminals. So,
so those would be the providers of those end-to-end money laundering services.
Well, yeah. So I separate between both because the end-to-end money laundering services, like I said, it's a criminal enterprise. It involves a ring, not a single fraudster or a money launderer. It involves multiple people, probably in different parts of the world. And another aspect which is very interesting is that you'll usually see in those rings, you'll see a very high level of specialization, meaning you'll have a person who does the layering, you'll have a person who does the placements, you'll have a person who does the monetization. If it's fraud, then you'll have folks, for instance, let's like a fraud ring that does ATO, account takeovers. You'll see folks who harvest the data, and you'll have a person who specializes in launching the actual attacks against the accounts and taking over, and then you'll have a third person who is who monetizes those accounts. So it's something, especially those more organized kind of criminal networks, there's a high level of specialization. It's actually fascinating to see that.
It is fascinating. I mean, I also noticed in I saw in your report that you managed to engage somehow with the fraudsters directly on the dark web. Can you tell us how that went?
Yeah. So I need to tread carefully here, right? So this is where it gets really cool and maybe a little scary. So as you mentioned, threat intelligence is also collected through lawful, I underline lawful covert operations or exploitation. And in plain English, it means direct engagement with the so-called service providers in order to extract high-value information from them. So without going into, details about who or how, the idea is that someone, an analyst working with us or someone else, engaged directly with service providers. And I actually am looking at some ads or not at ads, at the actual chat right now, and it's really interesting to see the back and forth here. So I'll read it out loud if
please.
Yeah. So I mean, here, tell me about your money laundering service. Crypto ? PayPal, Venmo, Zelle, bank drops. And the fraudster responds, "Hi, my service mostly goes with a percentage of deduction depending on your project. What kind of money depends on what currency you want to get back." So here's another question. Tell me more about the service and your process. Okay, so he responds, okay, so you want to change crypto into real currency, right? Blah, 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 or direct deposits, and so on and so forth. So that's a real conversation between one of our analysts and a real financial criminal that is offering money laundering services.
Daniel, one question that comes to my mind right now is, do you have the impression that, because I know that you did the research and, as far as I understand, mostly in English, and the communication also took place in English, did you have the impression that the people on the other end are like native English speakers, or maybe some
No,
people
not at
from other
all.
places?
Actually, I was correcting the English when I was reading it out
Okay.
right now. So the punctuation was totally off, and
Mm,
it didn't seem like a native speaker, but I'm sure there are
mm,
plenty of these money laundering services, and in English speaking countries. So, but I've seen ads in different languages, right?
mm.
I couldn't even translate. Some in Russian, some in Chinese, in other languages as well. So, like I said, it's a global phenomenon. It's not something that is limited to a specific geography or a specific country. It's really all over, and that's kind of how money laundering can be successful, in the sense that it has to have a more global perspective, moving money from country one to country two to other places, and exploiting that. So
And I suppose particularly moving money to places with maybe weaker regulatory AML frameworks.
absolutely, and
Mm,
without naming any names and stuff like that, we all know that there are countries around the world that, like you said, they have weaker compliance and regulation or compliance regimes when it comes to AML, and uh, and of course bank secrecy, um, that provides these financial criminals with a cloak of anonymity as well.
mm,
And so yeah, it's definitely like I said, the compliance regime. There is a global compliance regime, but there are specific countries around the world that don't abide to many of those laws,
yeah.
and they're not really worried about other countries who do enforce it, right? If
Mm,
that makes
mm.
sense. So
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. There are weird links. We have seen it over and over again.
mhm.
I One last question I wanted to ask you is regarding the choice of platform, like because we have discussed this on other episodes of our other podcast, that there is obviously a lot of shady business happening on Telegram
Right.
as well. I'm sure maybe even similar type of services potentially are offered on Telegram. Like, what is how does the dark web differ in this sense from Telegram, or if it does at all?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So the dark web, right? The Tor network or the P2P network, and it actually dated. I mean, it started over 25 years ago. Okay, so it started long before Telegram. Uh, Started, and so I've been, again, primarily working when it comes to investigations and stuff like that in the dark web, because until recent years we didn't really have Telegram. Now we're seeing a lot of activity in Telegram. One, because of the security features and anonymity features, right? The encryption
Mm,
and the ability to self-destruct, entire conversations and all sorts of stuff like that. So we're seeing a similar activity over there, but we're also seeing a very, very close link between both platforms, right? We're seeing, I would say that at least in 60 or 70% of the ads that were sampled, you also had a Telegram address over there, or a Telegram. I don't know what you call it. You call it a
a group,
Telegram,
yeah.
or a group, or a bio,
Mm,
or something like that.
mm,
So they were using that. In fact, they were advertising their services in different forums and different marketplaces. But I think the method in most cases is to actually continue the conversation on Telegram or one of those platforms.
mm. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Uh,
it's hard to say that they're using one of them more than the other. I think they're
mm,
using both of each other because they complement each other.
mm.
But like I said, when I started doing this, I started in the dark web. We didn't have Telegram yet, so.
Yeah, yeah, no, understood.
Mhm.
Um, All right, Daniel, is there anything else our listeners, people in anti-financial crime or compliance, our listeners should know about money laundering as a service, or as you called it, MLAS? What you call it?
MLAS, yeah.
MLAS.
Yeah, just a few key takeaways. So one thing that I always like to talk about the economics behind financial crime and cyber crime, okay? And AML, anti-money laundering, the AML profession has an evil twin, okay? And that is money laundering as a service. Just like folks who are professional, money launder, analysts and investigators and stuff like that, folks who try to stop money laundering, there is an evil twin or a mirror kind of profession, and that's the money laundering as a service. Another important key takeaway is that fraud and AML have another nexus over here. We're seeing a lot of fraudulent accounts, right? Where the data was stolen or they were taken over by fraudsters, but then they're used for money laundering, bank drops, for instance. And I think maybe the main key takeaway is that companies, especially financial institutions, they need to build robust threat intelligence programs and take a more proactive approach versus a more reactive approach like we're seeing now, right? Essentially have folks like me and other investigators who crawl the dark web and Telegram, and they do it systematically, and they come up with intelligence reports, and they provide timely reports to management and to, of course, to the relevant professionals in the organization. And they do that proactively, and they, instead of waiting for something to happen and then scramble and start dealing with the problem.
No, that is very helpful, Daniel, and I like the evil twin analogy. I've been thinking about this a lot because obviously we work in this space. We see a lot of financial crime, and it's obviously at the end of the day it always has to end with the laundering, right? So like a lot of these criminals have to unavoidably end up in this situation where they look for providers of those services. So it's extremely valuable, that you've done this work, and then we can see how all those typologies and how this works. So thanks a lot for this, and thank
you for having me,
speaking to me, and please let me know when you come up with another report.
Of course. Thanks again for having me, and it was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.